2019 lecture series on the topic of a sustainable campus. Last week we heard from Sid England, who's got the unenviable job of, as much as anybody, coordinating sustainability planning on campus. We got a nice write-up in Dateline. I don't know if any of you saw this article, but it's really worth looking at, and hopefully we'll get the word out there a little bit. Also, there is for those of you who might be grad students who are interested in teaching, next Wednesday there's a talk, and why can't I find it? It's right here somewhere. Do you know the room and stuff like that?
Cultural studies.
Okay, here we go. Sustainability across the curriculum is the program, is the topic for next week's design lecture series. It's a different lecture series. By Jeffrey Chase, who did a sustainability curricula at Northern Arizona University. His talk is October 21st. Doesn't have a time in here, but I believe it's noon. And the art annex. So check it out. I'm going to pass around the roster as usual. If you're enrolled for the class, please share your name. And today we are lucky to have with us Ellen Zagari, who is the Director of Horticulture at the UC Davis Arboretum. The Arboretum, of course, being an extremely important facility for LDA, for all of our students and all of us faculty too. If you haven't been down there recently, I encourage everyone to get down there. It's where we can learn about a whole range of things, which we're going to hear about. Also, you can get great plants tomorrow at the plant sale. Maybe we'll hear about that too. Except don't go before me, because I want to... Anyway, Ellen is a graduate of UC Davis. She has a master's in environmental horticulture. She is a good example that you can work your way up. She started in the nursery in 1984 as a plant propagator and has performed a number of other tasks there. She says her advice is, if you love it, just keep at it. So living proof that you can move upwards and have a variety of different interesting tasks at the same place. She's originally from the East Coast, undergrad from the University of Connecticut, and she says she has a passion for biological relations between biology, animals, pollinators, and other plants, of course. So anyway, with that, thank you for joining us, Ellen.
You're welcome. And should I do it?
Let me get Lex first.
So I was asked today to talk to you about sustainability initiatives at the Arboretum, and it divides up in, once I started really thinking about it, it kind of divides up in two ways. One is the things we actually do to try to be more sustainable in our practices, in our maintenance practices, when we have a new project coming online and that we're going to build, and then also in our educational and outreach programs. And I think that it's in the educational and outreach programs that we make the most impact to the community about, and I rarely use the word sustainability because it's such a hot button that nobody really understands what it means sometimes, because it's a really complex issue. It involves energy, it involves where you got what you bought, how long you drove it in the truck, all those issues. And I think Sid talked about that, and I'm sure your other speakers addressed that, so I'm not going to really do an overview of that or anything, because I feel like you'll get that elsewhere. What I'm going to focus on is in the landscape, in landscape planning and landscape maintenance, what are the things that we do to be most sustainable, and what are the things that we promote in our education programs for others to do. So the Arboretum is, okay, who's never been to the Arboretum? Yay! So how many of you think the Arboretum is that big lake with a lawn around it? No? Okay, good, you guys are educated. The Arboretum is 96 acres. It used to be the very south edge of campus. Now the campus has jumped over. Now we have Mondavi. We have the Center for Performing Arts. We have a Center for Wine and Food Science. But the Arboretum started out, it was like the back 40. In 1937, they said, let's just set that land up the side along the creek. It floods all the time anyway. It's always full of garbage. So we're going to make it an Arboretum someday, so we'll set it aside. But there was very limited support. So nothing really happened at the Arboretum in the early years. There were people that wanted to plant, but there was no infrastructure. When I say no infrastructure, I mean there was no water. There was no way to water the plants. The first plantings were watered in buckets, people who hauled buckets of water. And so what happened was the plantings that were put in and the plantings that survived were all very low water, very low maintenance requiring plants, which are the perfect plants for sustainable gardens. And some of our oldest specimens are really good examples of that. But as the years have gone by, the Arboretum has grown. It's become what we call a living museum. All of our plants in our collections are mapped. They have accession numbers. Anything, if you want to know what's there, you can go online. You can look at our collections maps. You can also, there's a search engine. You can search genus or genus and species, whichever plant you're looking for. It'll send you to the collection where it is, and then you can find it. So we very much have become, we're pushing toward becoming a scientific resource with great value to the researchers on campus. But for the visitor and for the person that's not oriented in that direction, it's really a vast collection of species that actually will grow in the Central Valley. And those of you who are from the Central Valley, maybe you think, well, what's the big deal? Well, if you've come from New England or if you're from the Bay Area, you know that you can grow completely different plants in other places that when you bring them here and you put them here, they just die. And so there's a very special subset of plants for the interior hot regions, hot summer regions of California that are more suitable but really little known and little used. So these are some two really good examples of sustainable landscapes. This is our heritage oak trees. These oak trees were growing along the banks of the waterway in the Arboretum since before the Europeans arrived here. So this is the natural forest that once existed in this whole area. And so underneath it, what we've done is we've planted the native Stipa pulchra, which is the native bunch grass, which also would have existed during that time in the plains between the oaks and would have been fed upon by the large herbivores that were grazing. And then underneath the oaks along rivers, another excellent and sustainable practice is redbuds. If you can grow redbuds without supplemental irrigation in the shade of the oaks and riparian areas. So these are like no input, low input ideas for people who don't want to waste water. So this is why I asked the question about, you know, do you think the Arboretum is a lawn with a lake in the middle? And some of it is, but I think of that story, the blind Indian gentleman who meet an elephant, and one guy runs up against the side of the elephant and he goes, then they're all like, what's an elephant? What's an elephant like? And he says, oh, an elephant's like a wall. And another person gets to the back of the elephant and grabs the tail and says, no, 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 an elephant's like a rope. And then somebody else gets the trunk and they grab the trunk and they say, no, 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 the elephant's like a tail. And what it is if you don't really know what it is you have, whatever your immediate introduction to it, the first thing you see is what you think all of it is, and that's not true. The same is true of the Arboretum. We have some high water areas. We do have a few high water areas. The Redwood Grove, the area around Mark Pond, is one area, very lush, not particularly sustainable, not water conserving. Another area is a lawn area that's out at the far west end, which is from the 60s, before they worried about things like water conservation. And so these are sort of little historical remnants of landscape architecture beliefs at those times, and we've conserved them because we have plants in those collections that need that kind of care. But all of our newer collections, if you were to reach out and grab the elephant we call the Arboretum, you might find something that is completely deciduous in the summer and has no leaves at all. It's like, well, why would you want to have that? And all the grasses are golden in the summer and they're not green anymore, and why would you want to have that? And those are our more sustainable areas. And that's just some of the looks of what you might see out by Putah Creek Lodge. This is a big recreational area that goes with the lodge, so there's a lawn, people have weddings, soccer games, all kinds of things out there. But just across on the other side of the bank, we have much drier plantings that are low water. We have Australian plants, which is very low water at the east end. So that's an area you won't see a lawn and you won't see any high water plants. This is in the what we call the California lawn in the native plant section, and this is in spring, so it looks good in spring. But with very little supplemental irrigation this time of year, it's just mostly golden. So where do we go to, where did I go? Steve asked me to think a little bit about how I came to trying to be more sustainable. Because I had a very traditional horticultural background, crop production in greenhouses, you know, roses, cyclamens, different kinds of plants that are used for ornament, and without anybody thinking about how much water or resources they were going to use, because it just wasn't an issue. And but there are lots of places to go as you're learning about sustainable practices, and I think one really good place, although I find the amount of information there a little overwhelming, is the sustainablesites.com. And for those of you that are interested in more, I just have a few, I don't have enough for everybody, and if you give me your email address, I'll send you this, a list of websites that I have used to create talks on sustainable issues for a variety of different interest groups. And so it has some great ones, and it also has this one on here, so you can pick it up now and you can read about writing it down. Now, they already learned about the Sustainable Sites Initiative?
I don't think we've talked about it, so go for it.
Okay.
We had a whole series on it a year ago,
but not
people
this
may have
group.
missed that. Yeah.
Okay. The Sustainable Sites Initiative is a cooperative project between the American Society of Landscape Architects, the United States Botanical Garden, and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And this is I took this picture at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And this is really interesting because this big structure here carries water. It's like a Roman aqueduct that they pick up all their rainwater and then they use it and they carry it here, and that's how the water ends up in the pond. So they're actually manipulating their on-site water very, very carefully and very efficiently. What the people involved in this project are doing across the United States is they're gathering research under a variety of topics about what really what will and does make our landscapes more sustainable in the very long term. Like, what is truly a low input action that you can take that will not take away from the people of the future, that will actually maybe even give back to whatever resources they might need. It has so much information. It's about hydrology, it's about soils, it's about human relationships and human experience in the landscape and how important that is. It's about ecological services, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about my obsession I have with invertebrates, with insects, and the relationship between landscapes and insects and why it's so important. So yeah, if you want to know more, that's a great place to start. They're in the middle of the first review, I guess. They did a preliminary document, now there's a review, and I don't think they'll have the whole thing done. From what I saw online yesterday, it was like 2012. So it's a big, long, involved process involving many, many people. So the Arboretum landscapes sustainability, you know, just thinking about that. There's Rack Hall, has redwood trees around it. Redwood trees are not particularly sustainable in the Central Valley. They need lots of water. But we deal with each of them on a case-by-case basis within what we call our living museum. What can we do to make each of our landscapes less resource intensive? And what can we add to them to help provide more ecological services? Yet our really primary mission is to create a beautiful place for visitors, students, for people to relax, for people to learn about nature. And also, a really important thing about the Arboretum is we're not separate from anything else. We are part of the university, we're part of grounds. There's recent reorganization. If you were here last weekend, you heard Sid England. We're now colleagues all in the same group. So they've merged together all these groups that are land-oriented, I would have to say, and that take resources but also represent the campus's natural resources. And they've put us all together. So the Arboretum has to follow the rules and regulations of the grounds division. So if the grounds division says you have to have a concrete walkway there, we can go and say, oh no, we want permeable paving because it's more ecological. And they say, if they say no, that's like, just give up because it's not going to happen. So
Never give up.
Never give up. But the campus as a whole, obviously from what you've heard so far, and did Bob Seeger talk yet?
No, he's talking in the...
Okay, the whole campus as a whole, the campus leadership at the very highest level is moving in this direction. The fact that they said the word biodigester, I was like, who's going to manage the biodigester? That's a very new idea for this place in terms of maintenance and operations. So it's going to be a very, very interesting next steps. So I sort of have my own guiding principles that I've developed for when I give talks and when I'm trying to talk to people to take from the millions of different things you can tell someone what makes a landscape more sustainable. And there are three basic areas of sustainability. One is trying to conserve resources. So you try to save water, because by using less water, you're going to save the direct cost of having to buy water if you're a homeowner, what you pay on your bill. And at the university, you're going to save the cost of the energy that it took to pump that water, because we don't pay for our water. The Arboretum does not pay for water. We just get it for free, which I think is really great. But somebody's paying for it, and it's the energy to lift it out of the ground. We try to use what we call low input plants, and this is a principle of sustainability and some other programs I can tell you about. So you use things that don't need irrigation, don't need a lot of maintenance, like shrubs that need constant hedging. No, that's like a no-no. So no more hedges. Hedges are over. They're passé. And then also things that don't need chemicals, they're disease resistant. So they don't need herbicides, they don't need pesticides, they don't need fungicides. And if you don't need to trim them, then you won't use fuel, and you'll save fuel, but you also won't cause as much air pollution. And then we have these environmentally friendly practices. Again, in the Arboretum itself, we do not use insecticides at all or fertilizers. Every now and then, some volunteers really want to fertilize the roses. I'm like, no, get away. We are trying to see what plants do without that input, and are there plants that will grow and still be beautiful. Because what happens is those chemicals, everywhere they're applied, there's a lot of research now that when there's a heavy rain and there's runoff, the water runs off into the gutters end up in the rivers, and so those compounds end up in the rivers. And some of the studies they've done in San Diego particularly are frightening about what chemicals, what pesticides are in the water with the poor little fish and the little frogs swimming around trying to reproduce. And some of them are what they call estrogen mimics, which is very bad for biological reproduction, particularly of amphibians. We also are very aware of integrated pest management. If you have to, in a production nursery, spray to control a pest, you would always use something like soap, something that would have no effect on non-target insects. And when we have yellowing of our leaves, we use sulfur, which is a biological, naturally occurring thing, and all it does is reduce the pH of the soil. So those are pretty much the only things we use. Also, we are part of the grounds program, which I don't know if Skip talked about recycling green waste, leaving all the grass clippings on the lawns, and chipping our tree prunings for mulch, and then reusing that mulch. But my favorite area is, I love to do friendly things, I love to conserve, but I really love this aspect of putting in landscapes that support wildlife. You can use and promote plants for nectar and pollen, for beneficial insects. There's a really important reason for using native plants, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And once you learn about the creatures that live around us, you can actually manipulate the structure of your landscape to create better habitat for them so that they can reproduce better. Does anybody have any questions? That's like the introduction, and now I'll do details stuff. So conservation of resources. Here's a landscape that receives only every 2-week water, sometimes less, sometimes once a month. It's a natural landscape. It's in the native plant section. It does not get mowed. Never sees a lawnmower. Gets these every like 5 years. They'll get a little too brown. We'll come in and cut to the ground with like it's a reciprocator. It's what's called I call it a hedge trimmer on a stick. And you just go and you just cut them off and give them some water, and they poof back up. So it's very little fuel energy to maintain and very little labor. And conserving water, I don't think you guys need any convincing about that. You know, the governor came out and they declared this big water emergency in California. There's a lot of intense politics going on around that. It's really interesting what's going on around that. But it's about us all being one state in Northern California and Southern California. We can't really succeed, but with projected population growth, they are saying there are going to be annual water shortages even before this last year. This is an older slide. By 2020, which is only 10 years away, it's just not that far away. And so we need to stretch those limited resources. We need to conserve them so we'll have them for what we really need them for. And so low water landscapes will help conserve these precious resources. One of the big movements that, and I actually got called to be on Insight on Capital Public Radio. Jeffrey Kelson, he called me up and says, I need you to come and tell me what's this thing about killing your lawn? Like this, if people use the phrase "killing your lawn," it's mostly in LA, and it's mainly that you take out your lawn because lawns use so much water than other kinds of plants, because they have so much leaf surface, they're so densely packed. There are drought tolerant grass species, but it's like the model for the thing that uses absolute most amount of water. So if you want to conserve water, you want to kill your lawn. We have lots of examples in the Arboretum of these low water use landscapes. This is the terrace garden next to Borders Music and Book at the East End. And it's a garden now, it's got a lot, this is an old photo too, sorry, but it has a shade structure in the back, it has big fountains. If you haven't been there, you should go. It's really a nice place to hang out. You can get your lunch and sit at the tables and study or whatever and sit in the shade. As the mixture of low water plants, California natives with Mediterranean plants and plants from other hot regions of the world. And I think for a low water garden, it's a good model. It's something people actually like and want to try to recreate in their own gardens.
Ellen, could you point out a few species there just for our audience?
These are golden cypress, so this is Italian cypress, which is Swain's golden, which is very tough, very drought tolerant, all of those. Deer grass, Bloombergia rigens, which is a native grass to the middle elevation of Sierra. Tough as nails. You don't have to water that plant at all. You can put it in the ground and walk away and it'll just be growing, keep going, maybe not this fast, but, and then it has this, what I like is this beautiful vertical, which arches out foliage. Then we have a ceanothus in here, which is also very low water. This is Lobangula lavender, Spanish lavender autophos, which has bigger flags, so it's very showy. So that's a non-native. And then this is a Mexican verbena, which is verbena, this is the greatest plant name. Verbena lalacina de la Mina. And it was found on one of the Channel Islands, and the people from Santa Barbara gave it that name. I assume it was near a mine of some kind. Oh, and this is Salvia greggii, which is also Mexican native, and this one is the hummingbird magnet winner, gold cup winner for hummingbirds. If you come to our plant sale tomorrow, you can see hummingbirds everywhere. Because the last plant sale, it was like the people trying to get the plants had to like push the hummingbirds out of the way. There's so many of them. It's just the same picture, and I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that they're native and non-native mixed together. We also have examples of all native plantings which don't need any water, which we get by without water, because this is an interior live oak, which is a really old specimen, and we don't want that to get water around it because it would be bad for it. So we've turned all the irrigation heads in this area so they don't spray to it, they spray away. So anything you see within the drip line of that tree can grow without any supplemental irrigation at all. And I think you can still make a pleasing scene using those plants. So in addition to the fertilizers, I mentioned that already, we do participate in the grounds division, green waste recycling. Right now, most of that all goes to the, campus has its own, what's the right name for a dump? Landfill. Landfill, has its own landfill. Dump is what we called it when I was a kid. And they compost it, they regrind it, compost it, and then they put it out. And then we've actually gone back out to get some of the ground up stuff and bring it back and use it for mulch when we need it. And this is how they do it. They have a tree crew. The tree crew has this huge chipper. It shoots it all into the truck. And then they pile it up, and then we reuse that mulch. So we take the chippings from our own trees, and we put them back around our plantings. And the great thing about this is it keeps the tree trimmings on site, so you're not contributing to the landfill. It suppresses weeds, so if you make a nice thick layer of mulch, so you don't need to use herbicides, and it also saves water by reducing water loss. So mulch is a really great thing. It has one bad thing, but I'll tell you about that later. The other thing that's really interesting about the Arboretum is one of the principles of sustainability that you read about is keeping all your stormwater and runoff on site. Don't let any runoff leave the site. And the Arboretum waterway that runs down the middle of the Arboretum is actually the flood control channel for the entire campus. So what, if you pour you're tired of your coffee latte, it got cold, right? Oh, and you throw it on the ground, you pour it on the ground, and it rains, it goes down the drain, and it ends up right there. So all the drains on campus all feed into this waterway. But the bad thing is it gets a lot of pollution that way. The good thing is it acts as a settling pond for silt and soil that's eroded off, so that it gradually keeps all that material on site, and then they can take they actually have been pumping in, that's a whole nother lecture, they've been pumping in clean water, tertiary treated water from sanitary sewer to keep it of better quality. And so then what is on the top is better quality that can go to the Pawtucket Campus Reserve System. On newer projects, we have tried to use permeable surfaces. This is the Redwood Grove, and this use of decomposed granite has really worked well. Permeable surfaces allow rain to get absorbed on site, so it reduces your runoff. And all of these principles can be found in various forms. Probably one of the most easiest homeowner and beginning businessman friendly versions is this river-friendly landscape guidelines. And there are people in Ecological Landscaping Group in Sacramento, and they are using this to hold workshops to teach landscape maintenance, landscape installers, and landscape maintenance people how to begin to use more sustainable practices. It's a big marketing opportunity for people who are struggling because business is down, and because of our recession that we're not really having. And it has the same principles in it that I talked to you about that we use in ours. We just give ours a little bit of a different name, and it's all the things that I've already mentioned. One thing is using integrated pest management. So if you're doing grounds maintenance in a commercial level, there are going to be some pest problems that are going to be very specific that people are going to want you to treat, and that's a whole field in itself, is knowing what the least toxic methods for controls would be in that case. And then this choose nectar and pollen plants is, they mention it in here, but nobody tells you which plants to use, which is where we come in. Because what we really focus on is the plants, because we're an arboretum, we're a collection of plants. And we take those same principles that are in Valleywise Landscaping and, excuse me, in River-Friendly Landscaping, and we gave it the name the Valleywise Garden. So we have plants that are selected for their natural size, so they don't need pruning, no hedges, no regular cutting. We only water every 2 weeks in the heat of summer, which is not very much. If you live in a home or you visit your parents, or you ask them how often they run their water, and usually it's every other day, which is not necessary. It's only necessary if you're growing water plants. The irrigation for a really more efficient water efficient garden is tied to what they call evapotranspiration, which is the loss of the water from the plants and the ground. And now we have computer systems that are computer controllers for the irrigation for this area, so it only waters when it absolutely needs it. We don't just water when we think it might need it. It actually is tied to the weather and has been measuring water loss, and then the water will come on. And just this last year, we retrofitted this area to put in special kinds of heads. There's been a big breakthrough in irrigation technology where they now have low flow heads that distribute water in a way that gives it plenty of time to be absorbed, and it doesn't run off and get lost. So we have these MP3 rotators and other kinds of heads in this area, as well as inline drip and some other things. But I think we're going to be seeing lots of new technology. I know there's legislation pushing that. But the big leap that we made to try to reach more people about sustainability and help the community and the gardening public of California to really embrace these was this idea of the Arboretum All-Stars program. And if you're interested in the All-Stars program, I brought brochures, and it has in the front some of the things, like a little summary of, you know, how does it help reduce runoff, and what makes an all-star, and what's really good about them, and all that. And it also has pictures of the plants. Excuse me. And this has been, we started, we do everything by grants. We have to write grants to support what we're doing. So we started with a grant proposal. I think it was in 05. And since then, this thing has really caught on like wildfire. You know, at first I thought, nobody's going to get Arboretum All-Stars. It sounds like a basketball team. But it turns out everybody did get it, that plants can be all-stars. And so I get phone calls all the time. I want to know more about your all-stars. Tell me, how do I get them? Where do I buy them? And then we were like, you have to come to our plant sale. And when's your next plant sale? It's not until the spring. So we decided, okay, we have to take this even broader. And we got some partners. And now we have 3 wholesale grower partners, and we have about 21 retail partners who have these plants, the 100 plants that we have in our brochure, and they are putting posters in the retail nurseries and labeling the plants as all-star plants. And it's really made a big leap for us in terms of putting sustainability in a form that just the regular Joe gardener can understand. So we promote these plants. They're low water plants, they are heat tolerant plants. These 2 are really fabulous. Hummingbird plants, wildlife supporting plants. We promote them at our own sales. We have education materials. They're also available at retail nurseries, and you can find those retail nurseries on our website. And it gives people choices, you know, and it promotes the idea of make the choice to be green. So you know all this, and I've already talked about this, and this is what I want to talk a little bit more about is attracting beneficial wildlife and ecosystem services. Oh, sorry, I got one more thing I forgot. This is our website. If you want any more information about All-Stars, there's or the Valleywise Garden thing I mentioned. You can click on this and you'll go right to the database, and in the database you can search and find the plants that you want. Also on the website there's downloadable handouts and things that you might find useful. And again, it's about the plants, because we're an arboretum and that's what we specialize in. And you don't have to just use the 100 all-stars. That's just our promotion for our system for promoting more sustainable landscapes. There's lots of other plants that are also good plants that are drought tolerant, things that other natives that we don't list, help Mediterranean climate plants, succulents, and especially summer dry bulbs. There's lots of bulbs that are totally ecological. So the other principle, and the one that I'm more absorbed in, is these ecological services and how when you plant plants together of different types, what you're actually doing is you're creating a habitat. Now you might be creating a not very good habitat, or you could be creating a really great habitat, depending on how you think of the structure of your plantings. And creating habitat is where using native plants becomes really important. The native plants have grown up with the native animals, and so by putting them back into our landscapes, the native animals that are there that might be threatened will have more resources on which they can land. Trees are especially important. Trees are really important not only because they can reduce energy costs if you're using them near your home for shade. They are also used as windbreaks, and they can produce annual heat savings by reducing wind speed and air infiltration. Trees also absorb the rain. They slow rain and capture rain so that it doesn't just fall on the ground and run off. It gets caught by the tree, gets slowed down, and can get absorbed into the soil more slowly. And I thought maybe Sid would be here. This is for Sid because he's a birder sitting on. But I read this really interesting article in The Garden, which is the Royal Horticultural Society magazine from England, and they had been doing research on diversity in gardens and in landscapes, in large landscapes, and They found the biggest factor that contributed to diversity in any creative landscape was the presence of large trees. And when you think of it, that really makes a lot of sense, because instead of everything just being in 2 dimensions, by adding a big tree, you're adding a 3rd dimension. So you're adding this way, that way, but also that way. And this is really important for birds because different species inhabit different areas of trees. Things like warblers will always be up on the top, picking things off the edges of the branches. The creepers will be along the bark, and the woodpeckers will be punching holes, like looking for insects in the cracks. And then on the ground, we'll have things like the white-crowned sparrows and the juncos. And they're on the ground, they're looking for seeds and things that have fallen down. So without the tree, you wouldn't have any of those birds, you'd only have these. Because you wouldn't have created the habitat. So why are native plants important to also try to use? Native insects normally do not use non-native plants as host plants. Native plant habitat is shrinking. Anybody that's lived in California very long has witnessed this firsthand, and I've even lived here that long and I've witnessed it firsthand. Gee, didn't that used to be a really pretty wildflower field, and now it's all housing, you know, or wasn't there a wetland before, and now it's, you know, a shopping mall. So as people grow and the population grows, the needs of our larger population requires more stuff, which requires more building. And unfortunately, that covers up and usually often destroys native plants and habitat. But the other thing that's really interesting is modern agriculture has really contributed to shrinking habitat primarily through the use of the laser level. When they lay laser the level of the land, they can go right up to the road really effectively. In the old days, they just drive their tractor and they like miss a bunch of spots, and that would leave some habitat. But now it's much more efficient, so it doesn't leave as much. And there's a really interesting book I read by Douglas Tallamy, and this is what from him, and he said, wildlife increasingly depends on parks, conservation areas, and our urban and suburban gardens for survival. And so this is my thing, is I think we can create landscapes and gardens that will provide alternatives to wildlife and may help delay or eliminate their extinction. Native plants support more diversity because they increase the resource base for native insects. And it's been said that insects are the little things that run the world. And we don't really want to think about that. You know, a lot of us don't really like insects. But right here, these things, these white things, this is food, this is protein. These are pollen, that's protein. And in these flowers is nectar, which is sugar. So when we provide these kinds of plants, they are built to provide nectar and sugar for native insects. There's a Ceanothus. If you use a greater diversity of plants, you're going to provide for a greater diversity of insects. When you have greater diversity of insects, that greater diversity is going to support more birds, more insectivorous animals, and more beneficial predatory insects. So you can, by what plant you decide to put in, you can have an effect on supporting wildlife. If you promote plants that are nectar and pollen plants, you're going to have more butterflies and hummingbirds. If you think about the structure, you'll be able to create more habitat where birds might be able to nest. And the native plants themselves will just have one more close link to the native animals. People don't really want to allow for wildlife in landscape designs yet. I don't think I've seen too much of that. And I think the best wildlife garden I've been to in Davis belongs to somebody that works at the Arboretum, who's really crazy about insects and birds. And the first time I went to his garden, I looked up and was like, oh, they'll never let me do this in the Arboretum. It was this huge jungle of twisted flowers and just a big mishmash and all tangly, and it was just like, it looked like a mess to me. But he had frogs, salamanders, all kinds of birds, fish. He had a little stream he built, had native fish in it. I mean, so it was like, okay, and so for me it's like trying to find a happy medium between a garden that can still look like a garden and have some of that capacity of what he was able to provide. And I said to him, where did you get the frogs? He goes, what do you mean? I go, where'd you capture them? Where'd you get them to bring them here? He goes, I didn't bring them here. They just showed up. And so if you have embraced the idea of wildlife in your landscape, you need to quit with the hiring a maintenance company that's going to spray pesticides all over everything, because that's what they do. So you need to find a company to help you manage your landscape that's familiar with integrated pest management, what that means. As much as possible, particularly if you want to have caterpillars, this is a caterpillar of a monarch butterfly. If you want to have monarch butterflies reproduce, then you need to eliminate specific pesticides that kill caterpillars because they're non-selective. Also, if you have plants that are susceptible to disease, get rid of them and try to find a plant that won't need treatment. Hummingbirds are a fabulous example of people who can provide wildlife, like just by snapping your finger, you can have hummingbirds in your yard. I planted a patch of California fuchsia at the end of my driveway because I knew it was cast iron and it would spread, and my teenage daughter was just learning to drive. She kept like driving over that corner. So I'm like, okay, you can just drive over that a little bit, it'll be fine. And every day I go out there and there's a hummingbird there. I mean, literally, in season. And they particularly like red tubular flowers. They lap nectar, so they like columnar flowers. This is some of the best ones. This is a native Salvia scatesia, which can be found right up in the Blue Ridge, right outside of here as you go towards the west. And the California fuchsia with these beautiful red flowers. Easily available in many forms. And there's one more thing that I just want to mention about the ecology of your landscapes, and that's the role of insects in our gardens. And you learn probably in the 3rd grade about pollination, that there's a bee, and there's a male plant, and there's a female plant, and that the pollen goes to the female part and makes seeds. But what we don't think about is at the larger scale, at the ecological scale, how is that really happening? And what has happened is we really depend on the European honeybees, this is European honeybee, for our crop production. But what about the native bees? I mean, there's, I think, 1,500 species of native bees in the state of California. So those native bees, some of them are on our crops, but also this process of pollination that they're providing is also keeping our native plants going. It's keeping our native vegetation reproducing. And we're losing some of those native pollinators. And there is a conservation, you can buy the stamps in the post office about pollinator campaign. Because we're losing our native invertebrates, and if we lose that, we're going to lose our native plants. Insects are also very important because they provide food. They're the bottom of the food chain. So they provide food for birds, bats, fish, frogs, lizards, all kinds of other animals. Also, they provide things like flies, provide decomposition services with fungi and bacteria that break down waste, dead animals, and plants. And I've had someone tell me that if we didn't have those kinds of insects, we'd be like up to here and all about this stuff. A lot of times I'm criticized, like Missy works with me at the CCUH, she says, Ellen, when you say beneficial insect, nobody knows what you're talking about. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell them what I mean. This looks like a bee. It's stripy, but it's not a bee. And the way you know it's not a bee, bees have long antennae. This has these funny little knobs, little short knobs, and it has big flies like an eye. Did you guys see the fly? Yeah. It has big eyes. And it only has 2 wings. Flies it's in the order Diptera. Diptera means 2 wings. So that's how I know that's a fly. So it's what they call a flower fly. And it's a bee mimic because it keeps the birds, that helps it survive so it can avoid being eaten by birds. But this is a very, very important predator or natural enemy that will eat aphids in your garden. Does everybody know what an aphid is? Anybody not know what an aphid is? Aphids are little clear insects that they call it plant lice. They get on your roses and they suck all the juices out. And there'd be thousands of them, you know, if you don't do anything about them. So these eat pests, but they eat pests mainly in the larval stage. So it's like a caterpillar and a butterfly, except it's a larva because it's a fly, and then it's an adult. So when it's an adult, it has to have protein, and this is the protein right here. In this pollen is filled with protein. It's getting its protein, and without that protein, it cannot reproduce, and it won't make the larval stage. The larval stage is the one that eats all your aphids. So you need to provide plants that do this, that provide them with this alternative pollen and nectar so that they can reproduce as adults. This is just an example of a native larva that you might, I always think of road warrior when I see this caterpillar. It's like this guy's Anyway, this is a common caterpillar that we have in the Arboretum. This is its larval food plant. It will not eat anything else. If we do not have that plant, we will not have pipeline swallowtail butterflies in the Arboretum. It's as simple as that. We'll only get maybe one that stumbles in, but it won't be able to reproduce, it won't be able to stay, because it only eats one plant. So really interesting and giving much more power to the need to have gardens that help support native bees and use native plants and landscapes is this phenomenon that's just happened. They're calling colony collapse disorder. Has anybody heard of colony collapse disorder? Okay, I know you do that because I already talked to you about it. Colony collapse disorder is a problem that the farmers are having. The peach, almond, watermelon, all kinds of melons, squash, lots of those crops, they really depend on honeybee boxes that are brought into their orchards, put in place. When the time is right, those bees go out, they work all the flowers, they pollinate the flowers, and they set the fruit that it produces the crop that the farmer wants. Well, what happened was in the last few years, the honeybees have died off, disappeared. There's actually been some media on the disappearance of the bees and why are they disappearing. And it's kind of a scary thing for a farmer whose whole livelihood, he loses a crop in any given year. He's out of luck because he's got probably everything invested in that he has in order to make it to the next year. So colony collapse disorder has become a big political and scientific issue. There's a whole society that's been formed, Xerces Society, about pollinator preservation and doing research on studying what's the problem. This afternoon is the opening of the Haagen-Dazs Honeybee Haven Garden on campus. There's going to be a facility for studying honeybees, and they're going to do special plantings out there, and they're studying this problem out there, what's causing it. But in the very short term, it got the attention of the Federal Department of Agriculture. That's what a big impact it had. Did you want to say something?
It's 5 minutes left.
Okay. Native bees, but what they found is Claire Kremen from Berkeley found that native bees make up a high proportion of bee visits in certain crops. They did their research up in the Cape Hay. They found that without the honeybees, if there was native habitat nearby, they got all their crops pollinated even without the honeybees because there were enough native bees to do the job. Well, my brain is like, aha, native vegetation. We need native vegetation in our gardens. We need it everywhere because that will provide the buffer against us having these economic problems or disasters caused by the lack of the European honeybee. You should never be dependent on a single species for anything. Not for your urban forest, not for anything. So there's tons more information on these topics, sustainable landscape construction. Sid mentioned LEED rating system. What the sustainable sites are doing is working up a LEED system for landscapes. And then this is the Bay Friendly Landscape Guidelines, which gave birth to the River Friendly Landscape Guidelines. This is the book I mentioned. This is fascinating. It's back east, unfortunately, because it's not the same species, but just the relationships of the insects when he converts his yard to natives, what happens. The Xerces Society, Xerces, has unbelievable, never-ending amounts of information on how to improve landscapes. I don't know why this is so light, but this is the list of websites. I made some copies, and if you give me your email, I'll email that to you if there's not enough. And in summary, people and in your landscape designs, use plants that are heat tolerant if they're going to be in the Central Valley. Try to pick things that require less water, and pick plants that support birds, bees, and beneficial insects. We've got lots of examples in the UC Davis Arboretum if you want to learn more. And just remember, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. The birds and bumblebees will thank you.
Maybe just one or two quick questions. Yeah.
Where is the honeybee garden?
It's a bee biology, which is out on Hutchison, West Campus, out in the boondocks.
Okay.
And they're having an opening today.
That's not a lot of them.
No, unfortunately. No, they wanted it right near the beef allergy.
That landscape kind of sustainable landscape construction, do you have micros?
Yes. Actually, I have it in my office, but it should be in the library book now.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, is there one more quick question?
Do you have an otter up there?
No one has reported otter sightings for 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, so I think they've moved on to greater numbers, or less numerous.
Okay, thank you again, Ellen.